In 1978, John Celestri was tasked with animating a new character for the upcoming Star Wars Holiday Special on CBS. The animated segment would introduce another mysterious and helmeted villain to the Star Wars universe. Star Wars creator George Lucas wanted the look of the short to be similar in design to a style made popular by the French artist Moebius for Heavy Metal magazine, which, like the first Star Wars film, premiered in the spring of 1977. Celestri was excited to animate a villain, and he and the team at Nelvana Animation believed that the character could play a major role in the next Star Wars sequel. He based the character's mood and movements on Clint Eastwood's spaghetti western anti-heroes, giving him a physical, imposing presence. In the animated short, the villain would ride a large, long-necked creature. He would carry a two-pronged rifle. And he would initially offer to help Han Solo and Chewbacca after the Millennium Falcon crashed on a moon in the Pana system. But it would later be revealed that he was secretly a bounty hunter working for Darth Vader. And his name would be Boba Fett. At the beginning of May, more than 150 Star Wars fans and collectors spent the weekend together in Kennesaw, Georgia, for Rogue Fun. Rogue Fun was a multi-day event created by members of the Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors. It encapsulated the best parts of Star Wars and collecting. We visited the homes of local collectors and were able to explore the incredible and unique collections they've curated over the decades. We went for a hike together, had meals together, and took over Kennesaw's Hilton Garden Inn Hotel for a long weekend. But the main event occurred on Saturday, May 4th. Held in the Hilton Ballroom, the Rogue Fun team gave us a day to remember, with 5 fascinating collector panels. The first was a look at the history of Sears and its connection to Star Wars through the Sears Wish Book. If you'd like to hear the full panel, you can check it out in episode 176, titled Star Wars and the Golden Age of the Sears Wish Book with Jerry Hancock. The second was a conversation with 2 action figure customizers who have made a true impact on the collecting community. You can listen to their full panel in episode 178, titled Customizing the Star Wars Galaxy with Ryan Shaw and Gary Ray Weaver. And that brings us to the third panel of that day. John Celestri sat down for a conversation with John Waterhouse about his 50-year career in animation, and what it was like to be the artist who brought Boba Fett to life. This is a continuation of the Rogue Fun panel series, with a look at the third of 5 wonderful panels featuring the best the galaxy has to offer. This is Animating Boba Fett and Beyond, a conversation with John Celestri. And this is Star Wars, Prototypes and Production.
From Coruscant to Tatooine, and every planet in between, Star Wars, Prototypes and Production, with your host, David Quinn.
Vader.
It's a trap!
Yes, Master.
Right.
Whoa, we're gonna have company!
Have to stand and fight.
The more you tighten your grip, John, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
The Force will be with you, always.
Alright, so our third panel today is Animating Boba Fett and Beyond, a conversation with John Celestri. John Celestri is an illustrator who worked in the animation industry for decades. Some of the projects he lent his talents to include He-Man, She-Ra, Care Bears, and X-Men Evolution. In the late 70s, he animated Boba Fett for the character's debut in the Star Wars Holiday Special. Our moderator today for this event is John Waterhouse, a Georgia-based Star Wars collector. John is a creative writer, Star Wars adventure story author, journalist, radio host, MC pop culture aficionado, and more. Everyone, John Celestri.
So, John, first off, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be with you here today, to have you here today. You were responsible for helping bring to life Boba Fett for the very first time in the 1978 Star Wars Holiday Special. Round of applause for that. It has built up so much excitement for a character that has gone on to be one of the most popular characters in the Star Wars universe. I know I was there watching the special, 8 years old in my bedroom. I was so excited watching the cartoon. I went crazy. I was jumping off my bunk bed. I didn't break anything, which is good. I'd be liable. But before we talk about John animating Boba Fett, I'd like to set the stage about his career at the time. John became passionate about animation in the early 1970s. His first big project came in 1975 when he learned the ropes in New York City working on an independent animated film, Tubby the Tuba, featuring the vocal stylings of none other than Dick Van Dyke. It was there he worked under legendary Popeye and Max Fleischer studio animators, and another landmark project took place in 1977. Move on here. I'm forgetting to do my job. All right. I'm just rolling along here. John Celestri. And here we have Tubby the Tuba and Raggedy Ann and Andy. And that was the 1977 film Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure. And then John found his way to Canada working for the Nell Vanna Animation Studio. They produced an array of TV specials, such as The Devil and Daniel Mouse, that you see here, and John worked on that. He animated The Devil and then moved on to Animating Dan. And another project he worked on at Nell Vanna was 1977 holiday special, A Cosmic Christmas, which caught the eye of none other than George Lucas, and that's when Star Wars came home.
Right. I'm going to stop at a moment. Notice the gulag that we worked in. I mean, that was 1979. We took that photo. That's the entire studio, and we worked in it was a working fish warehouse. That was the talk about glamour. In fact, all the animation studios I ever worked at for a very long time were always on the wrong side of the railroad track. That's me circled there in red. That's 30-year-old John, and that's the exterior of the warehouse. And then we want to on the other side is 10 feet away is Lake Ontario. And the winds, anyway, that's
So that picture was from the late 1970s, and at that time, Star Wars, of course, was the hottest thing going. And in 1978, Nell Vanna was enlisted to create the animated segment for the upcoming Star Wars Holiday Special, which we now know as the story of the faithful Wookiee, and it would mark the first appearance of Boba Fett. So, John, can you tell us how the Holiday Special project began at Nell Vanna?
Okay, well, we were in the midst of doing The Devil and Daniel Mouse, but prior to that, in the summer of '77, George Lucas became aware of what we did for A Cosmic Christmas. And the big thing was that really a hit for him was how he handled the space then, and also had a different feeling for animation. Because it was a Canadian animation, it's more European, and it wasn't Hollywood. And he did not want to have Hollywood in the stylings of what Hanna-Barbera or Filmation. he wanted something different. And so he came and through connection with Clive, not Clive Smith, but rather Clive and Patrick and others just made a connection with him. And he said, okay, I want these people because they have something new and different. So that's the connection. And so we became aware of that.
So how did you land the job of animating Boba Fett?
Okay, well, I did portions of The Devil in The Devil and Daniel Mouse, but because of the circumstances, I was switched off of that to handle the lead character of Dan Mouse. So what happens is that I said, okay, well, I was supposed to get the devil, I want the next villain. And so the next villain happened to be Boba Fett. So I said, okay, that's it. But also I was the most experienced person there at the studio. Even at my age of 28 at the time, I had 2 feature films, I had Hollywood experience, and The Devil and Daniel Mouse was only the second half-hour special that Nelvana had handled. So they didn't have anywhere near the experience I did, so that's where, being at the right place with the right portfolio and the right experience, that's how I got it.
So George Lucas wrote the script
Right.
for the Animating segment of the holiday special, and then the folks at Nelvana did the storyboards. And so what sort of Boba Fett visual information were you given out of the gate?
Well, we had, you all have seen the videotape of the initial, it's kind of like the white Boba Fett. Well, that's what we got. We got that grainy thing. Remember, it was a videotape, really. It could have been film or what have you, but that's what we got. We had that, and some schematics of the costume, basically what was done with that. And then the instruction was to make the cartoon feel like Mobius from Heavy Metal. The Mobius of the 1970s, and he would do that. So you'll note what the coloring is. There's sort of a semi-cartoony aspect to what Mobius did with all of the images, but also he did a lot of pastels, a lot of light colors. And so a little behind the so we were given that kind of that's basically the instructions that we had.
What about the instructions from the director specifically? What sort of guidance were you given?
Well, in terms of with Clyde, I got the script, and at the time it was only called the animated segment. There was no The Tale of the Faithful Wookiee. That came 30 years later, to get a name for it. But the instructions I had, as a directing animator, I started putting in how I would see the character, because there was nothing. There is no backstory to Boba Fett. So I came and I would talk this over with Clive, and basically I had a free hand on it. I mean, except if there were things that needed to be done within the studio, within the script format, the characterization was my feedback. So I told him, I said, this is a gunfighter. He's a mercenary. He's a gunfighter. I patterned him in terms of the energy, more like a cross between Jack Palance in Shane, if you're familiar with that, okay, and Clint Eastwood from The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, any of those characters, and it's basically a gunfighter. And so that was it, and that allowed me to read the script that way, so that I knew how his attitude, how his body language would be, because again, there are no eyes, and it's all body language and tilting of the helmet, something on a helmet to get eyebrows, and it's just basically that, so.
Yeah, so can you expand on that a little bit? I mean, how did you give him depth and character expression in that manner?
Well, again, as I said, I would tilt his helmet from side to side, up and down. So we have this here, when you go like that, because you have, the curvature. And this is where I start changing the model sheet, because the model sheet is only gave me, we got this okay of the flat design, but in turning the character around and giving it dimension, you start changing it. So I took it and started molding it. And it's very much, it's a difference between doing flat cutout paper or working with clay. And working with clay, you take the drawing and your pencil and you're working and feeling out the form. And that adds a whole new energy into it. Because, there's a difference between getting a line of action and a symmetry and movement into the form versus just puppetry. I'm not moving sticks. I'm changing the form and force of the character, so you wind up getting that electricity in it. So direction-wise, there would be things like, I talked with Clive about, what are we going to do with, in the script, it says, Lucas says, he punches, the bounty hunter that punches his steed, in the nose. Well, there's no way you could do that. He's on top of it, he's sitting on the thing is, like five stories high, and he can't do that. So that's why I use the, what I refer to as the tuning fork rifle, and using it as a riding crop, and whacking him around with it. But that also added, it was within the spirit of what Lucas wanted, but it took what was there and said, okay, let's expand upon it within the character of it. And that, I think, sort of set the tone for what you watched and expected out of Boba. And so all of that is, it was just, I didn't get any notes against it. So obviously it all went out.
So John, let's talk a little bit more about some things that you put in there that weren't in the script. I know that we were talking earlier, and you said that the way that Boba holds that tuning fork is very similar to a Bedouin.
A Bedouin, yes. Because again, I wasn't trying to be cowboy. I wasn't trying to be a knight. I was just trying to say, okay, somebody who's used to handling that weapon, what would he do? And so you take out, you do any referencing and thinking about what you've seen others do, from different cultures. And I will say one thing, and that is, because it won't be mentioned later on, I was asked, why does he only have 4 fingers, not 5? Well, I said, he's an alien. So, yeah. And so, there are things, like, the weaponry, tossing the rifle back and forth. That's from my trick drill team things in high school. I went to a military high school, so we used M1s and blades and did trick drill that way. So,
and of course, there's that fantastic shot in the short where Boba shoots the rope directly toward the camera.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and all of that. It's a lot of it. But once again, we didn't spend a lot of time on this. It had to come out real fast. So, I actually never saw any pencil tests. I never saw any testing. I didn't, the first time I saw the animation completed after doing everything, I would just flip by the pages, and just like you would a flip book. That's what it. I never saw the animation until the screening, until the TV show was broadcast. That was it. So I never, and that was the first time and only time I saw it. But I kept my rough drawings. So.
So it's such a wonderful, stylized depiction of the Star Wars universe and its inhabitants. And it's very similar to the way Star Wars felt on screen that very first time. It was a lived-in, yet familiar universe, but really weird.
Yeah.
And the same way is for this animated short, because it has this kind of art house animation feel, right? And it's gritty, and it's a little off center.
Yeah, well, it's because you had a lot of young people doing it. We weren't, by that time, again, it was like 1978. I was 28 years old, and as I said, like from my age down was the experience, and so we were trying new things. We hadn't gone into the rote Hollywood styling. It was more European. And as gentlemen from Quebec would know, that the National Film Board and any other Canadians will know, in the 1960s and 70s, it was all about experimenting. And so we just did the best we could. And so, we tried to do a little gritty stuff. That's all.
So, explain that process of animation in layman's terms. I know you work with a voice track, a vocal track.
Okay. Let's go to the. That's a moviola. That's a movie. That's from that's Frank Nissen, who designed it. And that's myself, and then that's Clive Smith, the director. And I couldn't find any imagery that was of that time period for the holiday special, because we didn't do any. There was no photography of that going on, But on the Devil and Daniel Mouse, I got to see, some tests and whatnot. But that's to be the size of how we would look at and that's we didn't do black on white, it was white on white. Those are the negatives. And we run the negative and just see, the black, and just looking to see how close we were to the soundtrack. Now, if you go to click to the exposure sheet, I think there it is. Okay, that's an Elvana exposure sheet. That was from Rock and Roll. But you'll see that there are each space is a frame of animation it was 24 frames a second. So that's how we break down the exposure, the soundtrack into phonetics. And I would know exactly where each sound was. And so I would know how to hit the beats, like I would hear a rhythm in the voice. And that's what I did with Boba, is he would hit the certain beats, so that you could plant him. Because you can't really do anything with the eyes, and you can't wobble his head back and forth so much. So you focus on what's the most interesting thing. And sometimes it's a head tilt, and sometimes it's just gripping his hands, his gloves, because that's what I thought, okay, well, here's something interesting that I could do, I could play with. So
what was your first reaction after watching the animated segment and the holiday special itself?
Okay, well, For the first half hour, I was worried as anything, saying, is anybody going to still be around when the cartoon shows up? That was my real worry. And then I wouldn't know, because I only saw the thing by myself, so I didn't know what the reaction is. And I said, this is pretty good, you know? I said, okay, good. And then that was it, you know, and I didn't hear anything. I never got any feedback. I never got any feedback on it. And I never heard peep about it, that anybody really cared about it until about 27 years later, until into 2006. Yeah, so there you go.
In the meantime, a lot of us were like the guy in the white nerdy video. We were going after our bootleg copies of the Star Wars Holiday Special out there. So,
but I will say one thing, is that I was expecting more Boba in the live action. I figured, okay, here it is, okay. Well, The Empire Strikes Back, okay. Then Return of the Jedi, huh? And then to hear people say, well, the cartoon is not really canon, and I'm saying, but I had more screen time in my cartoon than Boba had this live action. So there you go. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, so, and it resonates with fans to this day. Why do you think so?
I think it's because of the mystery of the character. There's enough there to give you a hint of what he is, but allows you to imagine and play with him as though you were Boba. I think that's what it is. I mean, I've heard one or two people have told me that, but I just, tell me if I'm wrong or right, okay.
Absolutely. So, John, you've had such an amazing career since animating Boba Fett. You've worked on a variety of projects, including Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, the original She-Ra and He-Man TV series. And today you're working on your own projects.
Oh yes, yeah. I do my own comic books. They are great. They're more along the lines of the old school underground comics of the 1960s. I have my own little character. That's Michael, the Blood-Winged Angel, and the character is If it was the 1960s, there would be no problem. I mean, it's underground, and it is basically very underground. So, and I allow my imagination to put the character into an altered universe, and basically, just as a pitch here, is that the character is the youngest angel, and is used as a pawn between the gods of good and evil, and in that circumstances is tossed out of heaven or paradise, and in doing so, promised the angels, broken, that if you obey my rules, everything you won't be harmed, or you will be safe. But in doing that, it rips the universe apart momentarily, but it's restitched back into an altered place. And the laws of what is good, what is evil, no longer exist the same way as it once was. So therefore, Michael has to understand and take into account and come up with her own set of morals. Yes.
And you also have an art book that you have here.
I have the book, yes. I have my Boba Fett book, which is a combination. I do have a couple of copies left here, because I did have to bring it all off and put what I could on a carry-on, and I was not going to put anything in check. So, but I have the books. I have some books, but I also still have them online. So.
And of course, this documents your work on the Star Wars Holiday Special. What does it feel like looking back at your work at that time? As an artist, I know sometimes we can critique ourselves.
I'm happy I could say I did the best I could with what experience and technique I had. And that's all you can ask for. Anybody who's doing any work, if you give it your best, don't worry about it. Don't go back and read. Don't fix up your Star Wars and make it the New Hope and do it 3 different ways. Allow it to be what it is because that says who you are as an artist. Don't go redraw. Take what you learn and put it into the next one. You put it 100%. If you get 85% of the way, that's great, because you're going to be stronger. You know, if you're weightlifting and you're developing muscles, you're going to be tear down and then you build up. But it's incremental. It's incremental. And don't go back and be. I can't go back being 27 years old. All I can be is 74. Right?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that work is pretty dang good as is. Don't you think, folks? Amazing time capsule as well. Right now, we're going to take some questions from the audience. If anyone has questions for John, and I believe we have the wireless mic ready.
Okay.
So I'm also really into comics, and now that you said you've done your own comic, I'm curious if you were into comics at the time when you did Boba Fett, and if that impacted how you did your animation style, and if that still impacts how you do your art, if comics has done anything to your animation style as an artist.
Well, I started off wanting to be a comic strip artist. And then I also wanted to be a sports cartoonist. You've not seen sports cartoons in about 40 years or so, but in newspapers. But I wanted to be a newspaper comic artist, but I also wanted to be a comic book artist. I wanted to write. I wanted to draw. I wanted to act. Now that's what happens. You take all those elements together and you create your story, and you know how to you learn how to design, and then you understand what the character is all about. And so all of that comes into play when I was doing Boba, because I was saying, okay, what is the body? What is he going to do? How does he emote? That's the hard thing. So that's what came into play with me. There is a question that people don't, there's an aspect of production back then that people don't take into account. In 1978, probably half, if not 2 or 3/4 of TVs were still in black and white. And they were still, to get your screen was at the most 19 inches, and they were like that. So if you look at all of that, you have to, and this is a color tonal thing. If you make your colors in such a way that your characters don't stand out against the background, you're never going to see it. So tonality, if you go back and you look at the holiday special cartoon, it has a very much of, you had your darker characters and such didn't bleed out or have a problem standing out to the background. And so, but if you one thing is seeing it in color, but if you have it black and white, that is just like, the tonality is great, especially those small screens. So that's. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Hey, John.
Yes.
That's going.
Yes, go on.
Hey, John.
Over time, I think animation and animators have gotten a lot more recognition for their work that they originally did not get. You mentioned it was about 20 years until you had this kind of renaissance. What was it that eventually got you kind of on the radar for people? Was it people who were looking at it and tracked you down? Was it something where, like, how did people kind of find out you're the person who had done this after all that, those 20 years?
Well, what I did was I started doing my own blog back around 2010, 2011, and part of my blog is to just do traditional animation, and so it was part of that I set up. I showed drawings that from the holiday special as part of, and I would tell my story and whatnot. It wasn't until maybe 7 or 8 years after that, around somewhere around 2018, that I got they started looking at it was StarWars.com. Lucasfilm was starting to look for, who did Boba Fett, and because by that time, Lucas had sold to Disney, and so they went looking at Nelvana and said, well, who did this? So they connected me. It was Larry Jacobs, who was one of my assistants. He was directing at Nelvana at that time, and so he in 2018. And so he said, well, no, it's John who did that. So they contacted me. It was in 2018. So it was, they were looking to go for the 40th anniversary, and so that's how that all happened. So now, so that's how that connected to me. But again, it wasn't until 40 years later, that they sort of actually, said they connected with me.
Recognition overdue.
Do we have another question?
That's it? Anybody?
Anyone else?
I have a quick question. Get that mic.
Get that mic.
I gotta give it to Ryan.
As we all know, we saw Boba Fett again in the Droids cartoon. I understand you had already left Nelvana at that point?
I had left Nelvana by that time.
Okay.
Yes.
Did the animators consult you at that point that they were working on the Droids cartoon?
No, they, at one point, it was, they contacted me to see if I wanted to work on that, but at that point, I was working out on, it would have been, I was at Booth's working on Dragon's Lair and Space Ace at the time. You can't do both at the same time. It's just an impossibility, and also at the time, I said, okay, I don't want to work on, it would be a problem, they were set up in Hollywood, but I knew, having worked with the major guys at Nelvana, I realized I would have had to be overworked. So I said no. But they had the animation. I don't think you need more than what I did on the holiday special to be able to follow and say, here's what the personality is. You just need the experience to be able to do it. That's all. So it was like they had enough that normally a supervising animator would have given to his team to work with and follow. So is that? I hope that answers that question.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yeah, absolutely. So John, you were talking about the fact that Boba Fett has this appeal, or had this appeal early on because of that mystery surrounding him. And us as viewers, we were able to create our own backstories. When you were animating Boba Fett, what was your backstory?
Well, once again, he was a person who had his own, I guess, a code. Yeah, it was a no-nonsense code. Following the dialogue and hearing, there was a certain amount of harshness. I won't say cruelty, but it's harshness. I mean, the beast, how he tells us, don't bother with these beasts. I don't remember what the line is. I'm pretty sure somebody knows it. But anyway, I mean, the fact that he would whack the hinds of that, the haunches of that beast, that'd be one thing. But he was a mercenary. He lived by his own rules, and that's you play around with that. But for that period of time, I figured that was enough of a thing to a thread to work with to create those the attitudes.
What did you imagine he looked like underneath that helmet?
I didn't. No, honestly, I didn't. I mean, it was, and the reason I didn't is because I had enough time, I had enough of trouble, giving those facial expressions to give something to it without getting all cartoony and playing with the, trying to wiggle, they believe you could do, eye blinks and whatnot. I just didn't want to do that because that would have destroyed, they would have stepped over the line into being too cartoony. That's the thing that you wanted. There's a rigidity to the helmet, but there's a believability. That's the thing about cartoons. As long as it's believable within the rules that you set forth, then you can do a lot. But if you don't, then the audience, I mean, think about it. If you watch the cartoon and suddenly he's blowing bubbles out his buttocks, or he's doing some kind of silly thing with it, or he stretches his fingers, If it becomes too Warner Brothers-ish or Max Fleischerish, then it's not right. But I don't think you confuse it with Disney. It's not super, realistic as Disney would be. So anyway, I was more concerned with making sure that he felt veiled. This is what my wife said. She never saw the full holiday special until a couple of weeks ago. Okay. I mean, we've been together for 40 some odd years. She's Canadian. She never saw it at the original show, the only time it was on. Anyway, so I showed her, said, this is what, this is why I'm going to these conferences, why things are how people responded to. And as soon as she saw him on there and talking, she says, he's sexy.
So he's based on you.
Oh my goodness. So, John, what has it felt like, starting from there you were animating Boba Fett, introducing him for the very first time, and then you're done with the project, and you step back and you watch this character evolve into this phenomenon. What has that felt like? Did you ever imagine that we would be talking about this right here now?
Well, I'm very grateful and very thankful to hear, and see your acceptance of the character and that it is giving you joy. And that is great. I would rather know and experience this now than have it happen 40 years ago and it didn't, and it kind of peters away. So, for the next 10, 15 years, between the time I'm 90 or so, that's fine.
And when you go back and watch the holiday special animated segment, like when you sat down with your wife, what makes you most proud? What do you like most about it?
As I said, he is a no-nonsense guy, but what I like, there's sections of it I really enjoy, especially in the beginning when he's on the mount and he's tossing the rifle around, he's doing all this stuff, and he does he's introduced so that you know that, oh, well, here is a character, and it's a friend, but then at the end, that when he's stepping back and he's getting into the escape hatch, that's one of my favorite bits of animation. But the fact of the matter is that it's still getting a character to emote and to give body language without facial expressions, to me, is the hardest thing. You can't do it any. I don't think I could have done it any better. Really.
And it's kind of a through line throughout the segment there, because even R2D2, he's moving, he's fluid. There's a lot of fluidity in that short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but again, I think that as a piece, it stands up. Because even though, it's beginning, middle, and end, it's 9 minutes long or what have you, I think it's, as a period piece, it still fits in. It has a uniqueness to it that I don't think you can't get it with CGI. The hand-drawn element of it adds to the grunginess of the original Star Wars universe. Original Star Wars is a makeshift place. It's scavenger. And that's, if you look at it in the artwork, it looked like it was created in a fish warehouse.
Yeah, and it's just such a, like you said, it's a timeless piece, it's a fun piece, and it even has that, that trademark 70s, 80s cartoon joke at the end that, oh, he doesn't smell right.
Well, that's Lucas. That was Lucas. He handled all that himself.
Well, I love it. It's certainly endearing. Do you have any one last question from the audience? Or okay, we do.
I'm sorry. I know you touched on this, but I just want to clarify. Did you design the pulse rifle, or was that something that they gave you guidelines?
When I had it, there was it was designed at the studio. At Nelvana. We didn't have designs. There were no cartoon designs given us. There was no pulse rifle. If you look at it, until The Mandalorian, there was never any reference to it. It came out of the cartoon. We had a prop department that would handle the props. But basically, my drawing, if you look at the roughs, it was basically a tuning fork at the end.
What did it feel like to see that tuning fork in real life?
I want to. Can somebody send me a full, actual, prop? Yes.
Any Mandalorian mercs in the house, I think they can take care of that for you. So, John, anything else you'd like to say before we go?
I appreciate you being here. I appreciate acceptance of what I did. And thank you very much for me to you. Thank you. Oh, wow. Oh, jeez. Oh. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Wow. Oh, thank you.
Let's give another round of applause. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me for another episode in the Rogue Fun panel series. Admittedly, I knew very little about the holiday special, or about Boba Fett's introduction in it. But hearing John's presentation gave me a fuller idea of how he helped bring Boba Fett to life on the small screen, before the character made his theatrical debut in The Empire Strikes Back. In addition to learning about Boba Fett, I also learned about the early days of Nelvana's relationship with the Star Wars franchise. But most importantly, it was great to see someone who had impacted so many Star Wars fans with his work. And 50 years later, he's still as passionate about telling stories in creative ways through his art. And during the panel, I was blessed to sit next to my friend and fellow modern prototype collector, Don Henderson. I remember looking around the room to see if John's presentation was connecting with the audience like it was with me. And at that same moment, I heard Don whisper, "This made my entire trip." In between panels, he had met with John and had him sign some of his animated figures. Don looked like he was a kid again, and that he had just opened a number of birthday gifts he was hoping to receive. And that moment was truly a gift. The animated segment meant something to Don. Meeting the man who animated Boba Fett meant something to him. And it was something that I could never fully understand because it was the culmination of decades of fandom. It was a moment that germinated from the seeds planted during his childhood, growing with every year. And knowing this about my friend, I looked around the room once again, this time with fresh eyes, to see how John's work impacted our fellow collectors. I saw so many people smiling, hanging on John's words and what he would say next. I watched as they nodded along or laughed as he punctuated a story with humor. And I realized that this event was truly a once-in-a-lifetime moment that so many of us were fortunate to experience together. So I'd like to send a special thank you to John Celestri for joining us in Kennesaw and for sharing his story with all of us. And I'd like to thank John Waterhouse for hosting the conversation and for asking interesting questions that led to a really meaningful discussion. I'd also like to thank Mark Rusciano for producing this live panel and for helping me to capture the audio of it for the podcast. And of course, a huge thanks to Jason Wasuko, Narayan Naik, Glenn Williams, and the Georgia Alliance team for putting together a weekend to remember at Rogue Fun. The next Rogue Fun episode will feature the fourth of 5 panels. It's another very special one with a personal hero of mine who inspired me and many of the people in the ballroom to collect Star Wars memorabilia. When it comes to the titans of Star Wars collecting, he is one of the faces on the galactic Mount Rushmore. And he was joined by 2 other authors I call dear friends, and who have created a resource that has become the new standard for books on Star Wars collectibles. I promise you, you won't want to miss this one. I really hope you're enjoying these Rogue Fun panels. It's been a true joy to share them with you. And I hope they give you a fuller idea as to why these collector events are so incredible. And you can really help me out by sharing an episode with a friend and getting them tuned into the podcast. And the more people we get connected, the larger our collecting community will grow. So meet me back in the ballroom for more magical moments from Rogue Fun, here on Star Wars, Prototypes, and production.